A recent poll shows Gascon's challenger, Nathan Hochman, is dominant in this race, up by 30 points, according to the LA Times and UC Berkeley. Nathan Hochman, welcome back to The Issue Is. Good to see you.
Great to be on. Thank you.
Are you surprised by the extent of the lead, 30 points?
You know, the 30-point lead reflects two things. The deep unpopularity of the current DA, who's implemented basically the most extreme pro-criminal policies in LA DA history. And then when they haven't worked, he hasn't pivoted or course corrected. So when the California Department of Justice came out with the statistics this summer about his first several years in office and showed that violent crimes, property crimes, hate crimes, shoplifting up 133%, all the other categories up double digits, it evidenced what people are feeling. That sort of fear for themselves and their family, fear to go to a downtown area and figure out what they're going to wear to make sure they're not robbed, fear when they go back to their cars that they're not burgled, when they go home that their homes are not going to be on the next door or the Citizen app or the Street People or whatever. You know, that fear wasn't present before, but is now, and that 30-point lead reflects that fear and also hope. That they hear when they hear about my 34 years of criminal justice experience as a prosecutor and a defense attorney, that sort of hard work middle approach of proportional accountability and my focus on deterrence, they think that approach will actually work.
Gascon would say that he's moderated some on sentencing enhancements, gun enhancements, hate crime enhancements. He's moved back on some of those positions, but there's very clear differences between the two of you. Before I get to that, though, for some people, this is an introduction to you. Can you tell us real briefly about your experience that gets you to this point?
Sure. I'm a lifelong Angelino. I was born here, grew up here. I'm married now 31 years, and I raised my three kids who are now in their 20s right here in Los Angeles. Had the chance to go to Brown University, Stanford Law School, clerk for a federal judge in LA, and went right to the U.S. Attorney's Office. There for the next 7 years, I prosecuted the full range of cases as a federal prosecutor. Narcotics traffickers, gang members, money launderers, ran the environmental crime section, and went after air, sea, and land polluters. Also had the chance to go up to corrupt public officials and dirty cops. 10 years after that, I got a presidential nomination, a unanimous U.S. Senate confirmation to run the U.S. Department of Justice's tax division. Great job. $100 million budget, 350 lawyers doing cases all over the nation. Finished that, came back to Los Angeles, headed up two major international law firms, government investigations practice, and along the way was the president of the LA City Ethics Commission, and with my brother, the co-founder of the LA Sheriff's Foundation. So I'll take my 34 years of criminal justice experience over literally 0 years for Gascon of having never personally prosecuted or defended a single criminal case.
Let's talk real specifically about the policy differences between the two of you, because they are pretty stark. So day one, you come in. Give me 2 or 3 things that change immediately when it comes to the way you prosecute.
Certainly. So what's going to happen is I'm going to eliminate these blanket pro-criminal extreme policies, and I'll give you 3 areas that Gascon put on his first day, first hour, first email when he sent 9 special directives out to the 800 prosecutors, collectively having thousands of years of experience, but he had 0. So, for instance, he said that juveniles would not be prosecuted for misdemeanor offenses. So it basically means in LA County, if you're under 18 and you steal just under $950, Gascon is not prosecuting you. I would eliminate that policy, but not go back to the policies of mass incarceration. Extreme policies have failed. Where I advocate is a middle approach, and I call it the hard middle because it requires hard work. It's the hard work of looking at each case individually, looking at the individual defendant, the defendant's background, the crime committed, and the impact on the victim to determine who the true threats are to our public safety. Those are often the repeat offenders and need to be behind bars, and the ones that aren't. A first-time nonviolent offender still has to pay their debt to society. They violate society's laws, but community service, restitution, or a diversion program if they have a serious drug addiction can very well be that punishment.
Because we've seen, like, for example, recently we've seen all these 7-Elevens, and there's a bunch of kids that go in there and are stealing and messing up the stores. What happens to those kids?
So in a hard middle approach, it's a proportional response. So those kids would have to go, if they stole, and we can identify them beyond a reasonable doubt, they're going to go through the criminal justice system. But the punishment needs to be proportional to the crime and the background of the person. So very often that could be community service. It could be restitution. If they stole $100 and they have to work for the next, I don't know, 20 weekends to pay it back, they're going to work for the next 20 weekends to pay it back. Because you have to teach young people at that age and create a mindset of accountability. I was talking to a single mom raising a teenage boy in South LA recently, and she was telling me that she's trying to teach her son right from wrong, stealing has consequences, and the son shows her a social media video of his friends stealing and nothing's happening. And she asked me a very telling question. She said, when did the laws become suggestions? And I said, they're not suggestions. But I can understand why your son thinks that, because there's no punishment for a suggestion and there's no punishment for his friends committing these crimes. That's a mindset we have to change, or else when these kids in their teenage years get in their 20s and 30s, you know, God help us.
And other changes that you would implement, you would be open to the death penalty for the most extreme cases. George Gascon is never open to that. You also look at some of the other sentencing enhancements in a different way, in terms of gun enhancements, hate crime enhancements, other things, gang enhancements. You'd be willing to go forward with those. And you would change, would it be a difference in cash bail as well?
So what we would hopefully go to is a risk-based assessment. And by that, I mean you have a constitutional right to bail in the state of California, but a magistrate judge needs to be brought in early. We're talking within the first 24 hours of the process. And a prosecutor and a defense attorney need to make the argument on whether or not they're a risk to show up in the future and whether or not they're a risk to commit more crimes. The higher the risk that these are going to happen, the higher the bail. The lower the risk, the lower the bail. This has been that risk-based analysis that we've seen work successfully in other systems. We need to bring this here in Los Angeles County as well.
Another change is George Gascon said that prosecutors were not allowed to attend parole hearings with victims. You changed that, right?
I would change that in a minute, and here's why. In the system, think about it. A victim family has often suffered the horrific tragedy of having a son or a daughter murdered. Now, the murderer has been convicted, sentenced, gone to prison, and now the murderer is trying to get out early on parole. So at a parole board hearing, the murderer have a lawyer, the victim's family's there, and for decades, the prosecutor's office would send the prosecutor to be with the victim family, not just to comfort them, but the prosecutor gets unique access to the information being considered by the parole board to determine whether or not the person gets released early. If the prosecutor's not there, the victim family doesn't get that information. But first day, first hour, first email, Gascon, for reasons I still don't understand, said that prosecutors could no longer be with victim families, and I have assured those victim families that my first day, first hour, first email will reestablish the policy of having prosecutors with victim families.
Gascon essentially believes that the pendulum has swung too far to the right and that he thinks that it needs to swing further to the left, especially when it comes to over-incarceration. Here's some of what he had to say.
There were blanket policies in the office before I came in, right? The blanket policy before is always seek the maximum sentence, right? Always seek the maximum charging. And I came in and I said, we're not going to do that anymore.
Essentially, he argues, and people with him argue, that we tried a lot of those policies. Our prisons were so overcrowded that the Supreme Court said it was cruel and unusual punishment, and that if you come in, we're going to send a lot more people there, and it's going to be too expensive, and it's not going to help. We're going to end up with them going back and forth in this cycle. What do you say to that?
Here's what I say, that I reject mass incarceration. And let me tell you what I think the true measure of an effective criminal justice system is. It's not filling the prisons to the breaking point. If anything, that's the failure of the system. The true measure is deterrence. Can you establish laws that are consistently, fairly, and impartially enforced with real consequences on the other side, and then show criminals if you violate those laws, you're going to go to jail, so don't violate them. The day and age I'm shooting for is not the 1960s or 70s, it's actually 2014. considered our safest year in the last 50 years. And what was going right then that's not going right today? Well, you had a DA that was doing her job.
Jackie
you had
Lacey.
Jackie Lacey. You had law enforcement that understood that the DA was a partner with them, not trying to actually stand in their way. You had victims understand that if you dialed 911, not only would someone answer the phone, but you could actually get justice for the harm you suffered. And as importantly, criminals understood that these lines were truly going to be enforced, and in record numbers, they weren't committing the crimes. Saving a whole lot of victims in the process, that's my goal, deterrence.
Big story in the news this week is the Mendez Brothers case. Their family members coming out and pleading with both you and George Gascon to set those brothers free. Here's some of what they had to say.
I cannot help but think of how things would be different if the world had known the truth back then, or if they had been the Menendez sisters.
Instead of being seen as victims, they were vilified. Their father's abuse was dismissed, their trauma ignored, and their truth mocked by millions.
If you become DA, how do you handle the Mendez Brothers case?
Well, obviously, I'm not privy to the facts in that case. I would if I became DA, but let me give you the methodology on how I would deal with the Menendez case or any case like it. I would get deep, deep into the facts. Transcripts. I'd want to actually talk to the prosecutors who prosecuted the case. I'll talk to the defense lawyers. I'd want to actually read the expert reports on both sides. Happy to meet with victims on both sides and get their input, meet with the defense lawyers and find out what the best arguments that are being made by both sides. And only at that point would I be in a position to actually weigh in on the case. George Gascon follows the political winds. He hasn't talked to the prosecutors who've been dealing with this case for over a year and a half. He is not steeped in the facts. So whatever decision he makes is not going to be a fact-based decision. It'll most likely be a political decision. The one thing I can guarantee you is whatever decision I would ultimately end up making is going to be one based on all the information I can possibly gather, and at that point I would make the decision.
You think he's doing this now because he's hurting in the polls and he needs attention?
Let's put it this way. On October 3rd, when he had the first press conference on the Menendez case of 2024, that's a year and a half after the motion was first filed in May 2023. But why October 3rd? Why that particular date? Well, the front page of the LA Times had a caption that said, "Teen killer case haunts Gascon," focusing on a 17-year-old woman who engaged in a double murder because of Gascon's policies of treating her as a juvenile rather than an adult. She only got 4 years in juvenile hall for that murder, got out and murdered again. So he is, timing-wise, the timing is extraordinarily suspicious that on the same day that comes out in the LA Times, he holds a press conference to announce that he's thinking about the Menendez case. Literally. He actually wasted the press's time to tell you that he was thinking about a case that he had already had in the office for a year and a half.
In terms of the substance, though, of what the Menendez family said this week, what went through your mind when you heard their plea?
Again, whether it's their plea or any plea, I would look at the evidence. Because in a courtroom, it all comes down to the evidence and the law. So that's what I would do. I would take their statements. I would take statements of any type of victim that wants to weigh in, whether it's, again, certain Menendezes that think they should get out, certain Menendezes that think they should stay in, but as importantly, all the facts of the second trial. I'd examine those and expert reports. And then I'd want to know what the prison file says. See, one of the confidential things that's not being revealed, as it shouldn't, is what the actual prison file says about how they have acted over the last 30-plus years in prison. I don't know that. You don't know that. But the DA should know that, and I hope he would evaluate that information in making that final decision.
Let's talk a little bit more about you and your campaign. Some of the viewers on the statewide show will remember you because you ran for Attorney General of California as a Republican. We've got an image of you speaking at the state party convention back then. And we know that you endorsed Kamala Harris for president this time around. You did so with us, which we appreciate. But there are some critics that view that as cynical, convenient timing for you, and it's just sort of a crass political move. What do you say to those folks who feel like that was convenient for you?
So what I've tried to explain overall is what my position has been in my entire political journey. I spent the first 20 years, I've basically been a centrist my whole life. I spent the first 20 years as a Democrat, next 20 years as a Republican. Now I'm running as an independent for a nonpartisan position where party affiliation won't even be on the ballot, and you actually want your DA to make criminal justice decisions on the facts and the law and not my personal political agenda. You know, the goal of a DA is to represent everyone equally. Gascon is trying to divide us. One of the old adages that someone told me is that criminals don't ask for your party affiliation when they rob or they shoot you. Nor do I think voters are going to vote on the presidential pick of a particular DA candidate when it comes to safety, which is the DA's primary job, and they're going to ask two questions. Who has the experience to get the job done, and who has the game plan, the overall game plan to get it done? On experience, 34 years Hochman, 0 Gascon. And on the game plan or record, Gascon's an utter failure.
But you did say the way you feel about it. I mean, and a lot of people have made a big deal about the fact of the way you feel about it.
You know, and I did that because Gascon has introduced politics into the DA's race, because he's not running on his experience, he's not running on his record, and he's tried to politicize this race and use you folks in the media to do it. I wasn't going to let Gascon define me. And so what I made crystal clear is that, look, politics do not belong in the DA's office at all, and I'll make sure that they don't actually occur in the DA's office. But I'm not going to not answer the questions that Gascon is throwing out there to try and let him answer the questions for me. So you asked the question before, I answered the question before, but I said in the same breath that I respect every political view out there. I will represent every political view out there equally, but what I will do different than Gascon is I will actually keep people and prioritize their safety in a way that that man has utterly failed.
Last time around, George Gascon got a whole lot of support from the Democratic Party. This time around, not so much. Last time around, you ran against Rob Bonta for Attorney General. We want to put up on the screen what Bonta put out about Gascon in 2020, essentially endorsing him, celebrating him. So I recently asked Bonta about that at the Democratic National Convention. Here's what he said. Any thoughts on the LA District Attorney's race?
I think the people are going to decide what they want. They have two choices.
So any endorsement coming on that one?
No endorsement.
Okay. And what do you make of that?
So what I make of it is that 2020 is a whole lot different than 2024 for George Gascon. Back then, he got the endorsement of Mira Garcetti. Mira Bass has endorsed no one in this race. Back then, he got the endorsement of Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom's on the sidelines. Back then, he got the endorsement of Senator Kamala Harris. Vice President Kamala Harris is on the sidelines. So I believe that the entire a good chunk of the Democratic establishment sees what you and I see and the viewer sees. That Gascon has failed. He has failed his own criminal justice agenda, an agenda that actually, with my experience as a defense attorney, I can actually accomplish. And he has completely failed to keep people safe in this county. And these Democrats focused on safety, think that Gascon is equally a failure and are not coming to his aid in 2024, though they came to it in 2020.
Yeah, because politically, sort of the way that Gascon could potentially win this race would be the cavalry to get behind him and have all those leaders try to cast you as a Trumpy kind of guy and make it all about the Democratic Party. But they haven't done that. And for you is the idea of no endorsement, basically an endorsement of you.
I think that no endorsement is a loud statement when they previously endorsed Gascon in 2020. So that is a statement to the public that they are backing away from the candidate that they endorsed 4 years ago. And I think that's in large part because folks are focused on safety. Safety is a crossover political issue. It doesn't, again, focus on Democrats, Republicans, Independents. Everybody wants safety, and they want a DA who can deliver on safety with policies that make sense. That hard middle proportional accountability approach makes a lot more sense than Gascon's extreme decarceration policies. 34 years of criminal justice experience makes a lot more sense than 0 years of personally prosecuting or defending cases. And I think that leaders across the political spectrum, and I've got actually 70 elected city leaders who've endorsed me, half Democrats, half Republicans, because the word is out that Gascon has failed, and November 5th is coming up quickly.
Gascon has been busy on TikTok with some creative videos, I guess. Here's one of them.
I'm working late 'cause I'm a singer.
What do you think of his social media game?
Wow. I mean, that is, if you can't run on your experience and you can't run on your record, and trying to politicize the race hasn't worked either, if you got to resort to what I just saw on TikTok, man, oh man. I mean, it's a reason that we have hit the actual maximum, which has never been hit in fundraising, $2.511 million from over 5,000 individual donors, half Democrat, half Republican, in amounts from $5 to $1,500. And Gascon had on cash on hand on September 17th, $46,000.
But he does have TikTok. So we're going to end with something fun called Personal Issues, which you've played on this show before to get to know you and some of your favorites. You ready? We put 30 seconds up on the clock. First thing that comes to mind, okay?
Okay.
What is the TV show that you're binging right now?
TV show, nobody wants this. We just binged that.
Okay. Book you most recently read?
Revenge of the Tipping Point.
Who is your favorite Dodger player?
Got to go with Shohei.
Favorite way to relax?
You know, probably playing any sport involving a racket. Tennis, pickleball, paddle tennis.
And what is the best Bruce Springsteen song?
I'm old school. Born in the USA.
Born in the USA. Okay. Well, my favorite, last time you were on, you said that Bruce Springsteen was one of your favorite artists. My favorite is Born to Run. So I have that queued up. So we end with Born to Run and let everybody know that Adam Schiff will be with us next. Nathan Hochman, thanks for sharing your views.
Pleasure. Thank you.